What's up guys, RhinoRatesMusic here, and in this video we're going to be finally doing a review of Kendrick Lamar's new album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. Yes, the review for this new album is overdue, but not as overdue as the release of this new album. 5 years. 5 years we've been waiting for this album since the release of Kendrick Lamar's last album, Damn, which for a lot of people kept up Kendrick's absolute ultimate winning streak of just fire album after album after album, while for others was seen as a bit of a disappointment. Even though me personally, I really liked it, but does it go anywhere near Good Kid, Mad City or To Pimp a Butterfly? No. So here it is here. We finally have the follow-up to Damn, and it seems like Kendrick is going out on one of his most personal albums. And when I say going out, I'm meaning this is supposed to be Kendrick Lamar's final album with Top Dog Entertainment label before he goes independent and focusing more on his own label. So Kendrick Lamar at this point needs little to no explanation. We all know the man, we all know his talent, we all know his capability, his insane pen game, his versatility, we already know it. But I think the biggest thing we need to know is, because I'm sure there's been a lot of reviews of this album gone out already, but in terms of my own views, do I think this album is good? And my answer is yes. If anything, I think this album is great. Now, I will admit, this is not Kendrick's best album sonically, as it's not as cohesive or as dense as something like Good Kid, Mad City, nor is it as luscious or as pristine or as jazzy as something like To Pimp a Butterfly. But I would say it's definitely more versatile, more out there, and more creative, and better produced overall than Damn, which a lot of people did not seem to like that album because of the direction it went to. It seemed like Kendrick was going for more tracks that were more mainstream friendly, more commercially appealing, especially on some of the bigger hits like Humble and DNA. I personally really like Damn. I really like the vulnerability Kendrick was showing on that album. I really like the concept. I did like how he had a variation of very dark tracks, but also some hard-hitting bangers as well. And I would say Damn was one of Kendrick's more depressing albums. It showed a lot of depression and a lot of vulnerability within him, and him questioning or wondering whether he is doing enough for God, or thinking he's being put to the test by God, but not being sure if he's doing enough for him, which a lot of people were pretty split on, both religious and non-religious people. But that might have been a big part of the reason as to why we had to wait so long for this new album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. And a lot of the lyrics on this album fully confirm why we were waiting so long. Because Kendrick was spending these 5 years not just focusing on himself and working on himself and his own mental health, but also using that time to see everything going on around him. Not just with the world, not just with society, especially considering all the world events that have been going on in between this time, but also what's been going on with the hip-hop scene. The way he is perceived artists and the way he views artists' perception of each other and their artistry, as well as their place in the game. And Kendrick also tying in some of their flaws and some of the corruptions that he has seen within the hip-hop game and kind of relaying it to himself. Just like on the opening track to this album, United in Grief, where Kendrick is referring to his success, the amount of things that's bored him, the amount of materialism, especially his own cousin, Baby Keem, who is featured on this album, saying of all the cars he's bought but barely ever use them, and Kendrick saying that despite all the stuff he's got, despite all the money he has obtained and all the success, it has not helped him through his own depression. It has not helped him feel any better, especially during this time. So talking about the album itself, thematically, yes, it is a double album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, but you have disc 1 that's actually the Big Steppers and is a little bit more self-centered, a little bit more about Kendrick and his own flaws, as well as some of the negatives in his life and things that have been impacting him, both in the past, his childhood, and the 5 years we waited between Damn and this new album. While the second part, Mr. Morale, shows Kendrick accepting himself more, working out his flaws, and coming to terms with some of the things that have hit him in life, both negatively and positively, and found a better place. So going back to the opening track, Unite in Grief, and this is where I'll start talking about some of the sonic elements of this album, because The production on this album, I don't think is getting enough credit, to be honest. Because while yes, this is not Kendrick's best album sonically, I still think this album is better produced, more cohesive, more versatile, and more all over the place than something like Damn. But not all over the place to the point where it's a mess. There is a lot of great production in this album, and Unite and Grief is no exception, because we open up with some more piano, with Kendrick rapping a bit more slowly, and then we get an awesome beat switch up with the drums as well, the drum patterns, and how fast they're going. It becomes almost difficult to focus on what Kendrick's actually saying, even though what he is saying is quite impactful. And then we get the next track, N95, which is completely different to that of Unite and Grief, and that kind of really sums up this album's sonic direction, how adventurous it is. Because you have some tracks that are more low-key, tracks that are more soulful, tracks that are more emotional, tracks that are more dark, or even a little bit shock-inducing at a couple of moments, but you've also still got some bangers on this album, some of the bangers that would compete with those on albums like Damn or Good Kid Mad City, and N95 is the ultimate example of this on disc 1, because we open up with the typical trap hi-hat, and we get elements of the boosted bass as well as the piano keys and some awesome synths driving the track, and lyrically Kendrick expressing being open about himself while at the same time calling out other people who haven't been honest about themselves, and using things like wealth, materialism, artistry, and wokeness to try and hide their true identities and who they truly are as a person. And then Kendrick referencing that to himself and his own struggles when it comes to that, and his own identity and who he is. And we also have Baby Keem on the track, Baby Keem and Kendrick's chemistry is still undeniably great on this track, just as great as it was on the Melodic Blue, and it only gets better as you get further on the album. Next up, we have the song Worldwide Steppers, which the production here I think is incredible. I love the very chunky and layered bass and drums, which kind of reminds me of the backing instrumental of the Jay-Z song Takeover from The Blueprint, but a little bit more dark, I would say. We also have some tap dancing sounds here, which opens up one of the metaphors of this album. Well, metaphorically, tap dancing symbolizes trying to work your way through a conversation to say something important, say something that will really define the conversation or the whole reason that you are here in the first place, but trying to find your way around it, but struggling to. And as the album goes on further, it does conclude the metaphor, and it is tied up to form one of the biggest themes of this album, which we will get onto later. But yeah, no, the tap dancing sounds are mixed so well with the instrumental. Kendrick's delivery is amazing here, as lyrically Kendrick is going over problems that he has faced, including racism, but talking about it in a very interesting way. He is referencing here the first time he had sex with a white person, and using that as his way to an intermissional revenge towards the racial injustice that white people brought towards people of color in the past, and especially what Kendrick himself also went through. Even though he knows it's not directly that person's fault, he sees this as a way to show them who he really is. And Kendrick also talks about other topics here, like, once again, wokeness and cancel culture, and how that has, in his mind, affected the way people perceive other people based off their opinions, and the idea of freedom of speech. Maybe diving in a little bit conservative here, but that's one of the other breaking parts of this album that separates the two sides, is that Kendrick is being more open on this side of the album, like he is talking to a therapist. We have the song Die Hard here, which instrumentally starts off quite simple, but I do really like the grooves here, the samples, the cowbell infused here. Amanda Rison's feature is okay here, but it's really Kendrick here who outperforms, and Blast, who provides a great chorus here, one that really sticks in my opinion, one that's not getting enough appreciation in my opinion. But I think the real selling point of this song, again, is the lyrics and how Kendrick is referring to some of his regrets, the bad stuff he has done in the past, and wondering if he's able to overcome that, and not just overcome that, but redeem himself as a person, feel redeemed by other people who have been affected by his troubles, personally, as well as himself, and if he's able to live through that until he dies happily. We have the song Father Time with Sampha, which is easily a top 3 song on this album, from the production with the chord progression. The piano is terrific, and the strings too. We have Saviour providing a great chorus here, and it's great to hear his voice once again. Which, speaking of which, it's also been 5 years since Saviour's last album, so where are you, mate? And lyrically, the song talking about issues Kendrick has had with his father, from neglect and toxic masculinity, and how the death of his mother and the lack of any sort of emotion that his father was expressing during this time really had an effect on Kendrick and his well-being and the way he perceived his own father and looks at his own father. Then we have the Rich interlude, which features the first prominent feature from Kodak Black. Even though he had a small feature on Worldwide Steppers, this is the first time where he really comes into play, and I need to talk about this because Kodak Black's incorporation in this album has garnered a lot of controversy, and I definitely see why, and especially given some of the topics Kendrick talks about later on in this album, which we will get to soon. This does not really coincide with some of these stuff Kodak Black has been either guilty of or accused of, and him being incorporated on the same album that Kendrick is talking about some of the issues that Kodak has been accused of. With that said though, I do understand thematically where Kodak's inclusion on this album comes from, and I see the artistic intention behind his inclusion a lot better than I did with Marilyn Manson or DaBaby's inclusion from Kanye West's Donda. Because on this interlude, Kendrick is portraying Kodak as the embodiment of personal progression in hip-hop. A person who is younger than Kendrick, yet has almost just as much as fame as Kendrick, and has been guilty of some bad things, which Kodak does acknowledge in one part of the lyric on this, and Kendrick using that to kind of sort of see where he kind of lied when he was around his age, even though in some way that was a bit much. I do get it, and I think Kodak's performance here, his mix between spoken word and rapping, is actually really good, and I like the haunting piano driving this interlude. And then we get the song Rich Spirit right afterwards, which I actually don't think is as solid as the interlude. I think the interlude did a great job at hinting out what Kendrick was trying to do, and the Rich Spirit, while I do like the instrumental here, and I do like the lyrics, how Kendrick's saying he wants to be metaphorically rich and he doesn't want to be portrayed like in the negative way that a lot of other rich people are. His performance here I find to be one of the weakest as well. And while I think the instrumental is good, it doesn't really stand out among other tracks. Next we get the song We Cry Together, which is easily one of the darkest and most shock-provoking tracks on this whole album, and one of the most unique hip-hop experiences I have ever encountered with an album. So the song opens up with the great Florence and the Machine sample, and then we get the Alchemist piano-driven instrumental, which sounds terrific. And then we have Kendrick and actress Taylor Page acting as a flawed couple having a massive argument. And not just any argument, the argument gets verbally abusive, from them saying F you to each other, to them bringing up some of their own flaws, them threatening each other. Not any sort of physical threats, but threats like her threatening to fuck his other cousin, and them just criticizing each other over and over again, and going quite deep into these criticisms, like the part where Kendrick says about fake feminism and all that, which does make me sort of question what Kendrick's actual ideologies on this topic is, but at the same time, on this track, it definitely works out. And then we have Taylor Page herself, who brings up R. Kelly on this, which does spawn another part of controversy, because again, on this album later on talks about the same topic that has kind of gotten R. Kelly into trouble, despite the fact that Kendrick in 2018 actually defended people like R. Kelly and XXXTentacion, who had been accused of sexual abuse, said that he threatened to pull off Spotify after their new policy, which meant that artists like R. Kelly and XXXTentacion were being pulled off because of those actions. So yeah, here it doesn't sit the best with me, but it is still a great track nonetheless. And then we get the song Purple Hearts, which instrumentally has some of the best drums on this whole album. I love the loopy and heart-throbbing drums and the way they kind of go up and down, mixed with the soul sampling. And Kendrick's performance here is great. We have Summer Walker on the track, who I will say doesn't have as good of a chemistry with Kendrick as Taylor Page and Kendrick did on the previous track, but still works out well. Summer Walker provides great vocals when she's not with Kendrick, and I'm just glad to see her on this album. And then we get a nice slight beat shift at the end with some more strings when Ghostface Killer comes on to provide an awesome verse here. And once again, great to see him on this track. Great to see both of them on the track. Now, this concludes the end of Disc 1, and then we get on to Disc 2, which I will admit doesn't really start off the best. I think the first 3 tracks of Disc 2 provide some of the weaker moments on the album, to be honest. So we have the song Count Me Out, which lyrically makes sense and does open the theme of Disc 2 nicely as Kendrick is starting to try and accept himself, move forward, become a better person, and try and right his wrongs. And instrumentally, I think it opens up fine, but it goes through some progression, and honestly, the instrumental for me just gets messier and messier as the track goes on, unfortunately, and it does drag a little bit. And it also has one of Kendrick's weakest choruses. And then we have the song Crown, which lyrically I think is fine as it's a track about Kendrick realizing that he has got a lot of pressure on his shoulders put upon by the fans who expect the best from him, who expect him to come up with some of the best music, some of the best lyrics, and him chanting in the chorus, he can't please everyone. And we have some nice vocal samples in here, but aside from that, there's nothing else more substantive about this track. This track is probably one of the very few songs in this album where I do not care about the instrumental. The piano driving the instrumental is very basic, generic, is nowhere near enough to carry the entire track from start to finish, and just reminds me of something that could have been on an interlude, or should have been on an interlude, or at least should have had more going on for it. Although I would say this song's still stronger than a couple of the weaker moments from Damn. And then we have the song Silent Hill, which has Kodak Black as a main feature here, and honestly, I feel like Kodak Black does the better job on this song. Because while Kendrick doesn't do bad, this is another example of him trying to meld into the style of another artist, which he has done many times in the past, and even on this album, what he did with Baby Keem. But when he did it for Baby Keem, it worked because they have a lot of chemistry, but partly because they're family. Whereas here, Kendrick trying to meld in the Kodak style and his delivery on the chorus, push these fellas on me like who, just comes off a bit cringe to me. Kodak's just better off doing his style here, and Kendrick's better off doing his style. Because once again, I do like Kodak's style, and I actually do like the instrumental of this track. I like the silent, low-key, glossy keys mixed with the pew, pew in the instrumental. I think it is quite cool, but Kendrick is really the one who kind of under-delivers on this song. But thankfully, all the 6 tracks beyond this point on Disc 2 are straight fire. So we get the Saviour interlude with Baby Keem, who absolutely kills it on this. Has an emotional verse as well. One of his most emotional performances yet, considering some of the lyrics Baby Keem has said on his music. He is going through some of his own struggles and his own trauma that he's gone through in the past year, and does it really well. Then we have the actual song Saviour, which the tap dancing comes back once again, and we did hear it at the end of We Cry Together, where it was said, stop tap dancing around a conversation. It appears on this track that he's finally stopped tap dancing around the conversation, and he's open and upfront. This song is essentially Kendrick humanizing himself and a lot of other artists. Artists who have been beloved by so many people to the point where people almost don't see him as human. They see them as like a savior, a messiah, a god. As Kendrick says, I am not your savior. Future is not your savior. J. Cole is not your savior. And then he goes a bit deeper onto that, and once he has addressed that, it's like kind of like he's asking the fans, well, even though I'm not the person you think I am, I'm not a god, I'm just a human, do you still care for me as a human? Do you still want me to succeed? And with Baby Keem joining in on this as well, both of them again have great chemistry on here. Baby Keem provides the hook very well, asking if people are happy for him and Kendrick. And the instrumental here is one of the best on this whole album. I love the drums, the percussion, how it sounds like it's kind of recorded or flipped backwards, mixed with the other layers. It comes together so nicely. Then next we get the song Auntie, Diaries, which is a song that we need to talk about. On the last song, Saviour, Kendrick was essentially humanizing himself and other artists, while this song hits home a lot deeper for Kendrick. As on this song, he comes to humanizing people of his own family and people of the LGBTQ plus community. But he certainly was not like that at the start, as Kendrick here shows progression, going from him being a younger child, just learning about different sexual and gender identities when his uncle came out as transgender, and how Kendrick felt about that, and how he kind of perceived this, not to mention a lot of the homophobia and transphobia that was going on within his community and people close to him, and how that kind of played out with his own mindset. But over time, Kendrick progressing. Kendrick going from using slurs to not using slurs, to recognizing how harmful they are, after his cousin brings up how if he's not liking the way white people would use the N-word towards him, then people of the LGBTQ community would feel the same way about slurs directed towards him. He also goes from dead naming to correctly naming, and also goes from misusing pronouns to using the correct pronouns. And that's why I think this song has garnered quite a bit of controversy, because yes, with the use of slurs, the dead naming, and the misgendering, this song is probably not really designated for the LGBTQ plus community, and more designated for the people who are once in the same mindset as Kendrick Lamar, less accepting, bit more bigotry even. And the way Kendrick incorporates this shock value to contrast with how people in his family and what he was going through helped taboo his bigotry mindset out into a much more accepting lane, to the point where he finally chose his family's human rights over religion, standing up for his cousin at the church, is a very emotional moment and does result in one of the most important songs on this whole album. Then we get the title track, or the second title track, Mr. Morale, which has a very hard-hitting beat produced by Pharrell, which I absolutely love, and lyrically Kendrick touching upon trauma and sexual abuse that his mother went through and how that's affected him. But he goes on that even deeper on the next track, Mother I Sober. This track is easily one of the most emotional, gut-wrenching, and important songs Kendrick has ever made, not just for his fans, but for himself and his family too. Because on this song, Kendrick discusses about the time his mother was a sexual assault, and how that essentially made her think that her own son had gone through the same thing at one point. Even though Kendrick knew that his cousin, who was being accused of this, was completely innocent, nobody believed him, and it was as a result of this, the trauma and the pain that went with his cousin's false accusations, combined with the trauma his mother went through when he was only 5 years old, really puts in a lot of emotion on this album, and I heavily applaud Kendrick for making this song. And given the accusations that the black community has had within this topic for hundreds of years, with the cycle of families being accused of this at least once, and Kendrick being the one to break that cycle on this song, is just absolutely heart-wrenching. And to have the sound of Kendrick's daughter on here as well, knowing how Kendrick has basically saved her and saved the rest of his offsprings within his family of having to go through this trauma and having to go through this mess that he had to go through with him, his mother, and his cousin. The instrumental here is also gorgeous. It's very simple, but very beautiful, very haunting, works well for this, and we have Beth Gibbons on Portishead, who provides a fantastic verse. Overall, it is one of the most somber, darkest, most important, gut-wrenching, and absolutely wholesome, but also deep and personal songs Kendrick has ever made. And while this song is arguably one of the best and most important on this album, I think Kendrick thought that it wouldn't make sense to end the album on a moment like this. So he decides to end it on the next song, Mirror, which has a much harder hitting instrumental, which not the best produced on this album, but I think it works here. And I like how lyrically Kendrick is basically saying that He has finally accepted who he is. He has come through. He chooses himself. He is done with trying to use his songwriting, his pen game, and his views of the world to try and help the world. He feels like he has done his due diligence, so now it's time for him to focus on himself and his family. And me personally, some people may find this a little self-centered, but me personally, given how much Kendrick has done and given how depressed he clearly was on albums like To Pimp a Butterfly and Damn, and to see him in a better spot mentally does make me very happy and make me feel reassured. And overall, just made me walk away from this album feeling satisfied, not just of getting another quality Kendrick album, but knowing that Kendrick himself has gotten so much off his chest on this album in such a direct manner, with great production, some great features, some great hooks, and really just can be of his own truly now, and it makes me excited for what he's going to do next. Regardless of how you came from this album, this was in no doubt an experience that I am going to keep going back to. While this album is not my favorite Kendrick Lamar album, it's still not going to touch Good Kid, Mad City. It is one of Kendrick's best albums lyrically and one of his most important, and one that people should not forget. And that's why overall I am giving this album a light 9 out of 10. Well, thank you guys for watching this video. Tell me what you guys thought of this album. Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What was your favorite song? What was your least favorite song? How would you rank this album among Kendrick's other discography? And tell me what you thought of this video. But until then, guys, I will catch you in the next video. This is RhinoRatesMusic signing out. Have a good day and take care. Bye-bye.